Welcome to another episode of the LinguaBees podcast. I am Ariana and today I am joined by my senior Karin Cruz, who is an MA in ELT alumnus from the University of Guanajuato. Welcome, Karin, and thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you actually for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here today.
First of all, we'd like to know more about you. Could you tell us where you're from, what you do, what led you to study the MA in ELT?
Yes, well, I'm from Sonora actually, but I was raised in here in Guanajuato, in Irapuato, but in Guanajuato. So that's why I feel more like from here than from the north. I studied the BA in English language teaching in the Universidad de Sonora.
Okay.
But during the pandemic, I was feeling like I was not like progressing. I felt like I needed to do more. I needed to do something different. I'm really curious about many things, but one is like being curious in the profession is another thing. So I read about the master's program. I was really keen on studying in the university. It was like something I always wanted to do, but I was not able to in the Universidad de Guanajuato. So I found the master's in applied linguistics, which many people who don't know a lot about linguistics may see applied linguistics and see that like, oh, that must be something like big or something like scientific kind of, or like bigger than we know sometimes,
Right.
which is it is big because applied linguistics once you enter the masters is something like wow. But while when I finished my BA, I had the opportunity to go teach English in China,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the experience that I like marked me as a teacher the most,
Mm-hmm.
and made me realize that there's like a whole big world that many people don't know, or many people sometimes we just focus in our context, but we don't realize that there's more than our context. So that's why that experience marked me a lot. And also I think it was um, another thing that led me into my research when I was studying the masters.
All right. So it's very interesting that you mentioned that you were working in China as an English teacher, and also the connection as to why you chose to study this MA in applied linguistics in English language teaching. Because as you mentioned as well, I also have experience working abroad. I lived in Russia for almost 6 years, and it is a very long time. And I agree with you on the fact that it opens your eyes to the wider perspective on teaching. And as for the question that you were mentioning about like, oh, people see that you're studying an MA and they already think it's something big. But when you tell them it's applied linguistics, in my context, they were like, "And what is that?" So that is the reason why we're creating this podcast, so we can share a bit more of information with the public in general about what applied linguistics is. And we're so glad that you're here to tell us about your experience. Now that you mention your thesis discusses Latin American English teachers' experiences in a North and Southeast Asian context, and it's about narrative inquiry into intercultural teaching competence. Is there anything in particular that encouraged you to address this line of research?
Well, as I mentioned, it's like my experience in China was the main thing, was the pivot to go ahead and research uh, what happens to the Latin American teachers, because sometimes we think China is too far and people are not going there, or people are not teaching them. But when I was there, there was a whole community of Mexicans teaching English, and I was like, why are they not teaching Spanish, which is something that you expect, or like an idea we have from Spanish is your native language, so you should be teaching Spanish. But maybe
Mhm.
Spanish is not as like popular as English is, as we in the field of English teaching have noticed.
Mm-hmm.
But that is mainly what led me into focus on that context, on that area of research. And also, I love culture. That's one of the main reasons why I went to Asia, because I'm really interested in Asian culture.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I will explain this later, but it's something that China has a lot of culture, and just being there as a teacher who was supposed to teach not only the language but the culture,
Mm-hmm.
that is the main reason why I was like, okay, but as a teacher, as a non-native teacher, what makes us? How do I know which English culture should I teach? Like, how do I?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do in order to make it, in order to help the students not only know about the maybe American culture or British culture, because there's so many countries that have English as their native language, so, and we don't pay attention to them. So that's
Mm-hmm.
why I was like, coach, I want something with related with culture and the teachers who are teaching a foreign language over there.
Mm-hmm, I see. So the cultural aspect is what intrigued you the most to and led you to get into this research project. And this happened during your MA, right, as well. Like this is a project that you developed throughout your MA studies, and this was your dissertation as well, right? To
Yes.
graduate. Can you tell us about your research sample, your participants? What was your selection method?
To be honest, the main like the main characteristic was that they had to have Spanish as their first language,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to be teaching English in an Asian country. That was the main characteristic, the main requirement for them, because there's so non-native teachers. There's so many non-native teachers over there, but I just wanted to know what happened with the population I was also involved, or
Mm-hmm.
I felt related to.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I really work a lot. I worked a lot with not being biased in what I was trying to research or
Mm-hmm.
what I was expecting from my participants. But the main requirement was that they had to be Latin American,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to be teaching English in China.
Okay. And taking this Latin American concept, so I'm assuming that there weren't only Mexican English teachers involved in your study, but what other nationalities were there?
Well, actually, my sample is not that big. It was really difficult to find people who wanted to participate.
Yes.
Not that there are not there, or there are not people teaching English there.
Mm-hmm.
Just that they like, it was difficult to find a
Yeah.
bigger sample. But I had to leave the title of Latin American because one of the participants was from Colombia, and then another one was from Puerto Rico. The
Mm-hmm.
others were Mexicans. So that's why I had to broader, make the sample wider, or the title like include
Mm-hmm.
all the people that are not only from Mexico.
Right, to be inclusive. So Mexican, Colombian, and Puerto Rican, right? So like these were the three main nationalities in your sample. In your research, you mentioned intercultural teaching competence. Could you share a brief description of this for those who might be hearing this concept for the first time?
Yes, well, I will explain what the concept is. I will not give you like a theoretical definition, but in general, it involves the teacher also being intercultural competence, knowing how to teach the culture of the language, and also involve the cultures presented in the classroom, and not only in the teaching but also in the material that is presented. Try to avoid stereotyping. Try to avoid be not avoid, sorry, try to create awareness in the students,
Hmm.
awareness of the different cultures that we may face, so that in being able to interact, which is the main point of intercultural competence, interact with other cultures without being closed and just tolerate what the other culture, or perceive what the other cultures represent. So as in the way of teaching, it's just all the material that you use, all your class allows the students to create this awareness and you help the students to be more tolerant towards
Mhm.
other cultures.
I see. And for example, in this case, there is a mixture. There is multicultural awareness in the classroom. If we're talking about Latin American English teachers that, as you mentioned, are non-native, right? Like we're using this label over here. And also we have a Chinese population, which is like the consumer of these lessons, in this case, the students. And also English, that is a medium of interaction, right? In this case. So we have like three different cultures that we need to take into consideration. So the interculturality happens there, right? Like the mixture of these three different notions. You were mentioning as well that I'm not a native speaker and I don't know how much culture I should teach, this and that. So, in your experience or in your participants, maybe they mentioned something related to this, or did they mention something related to this, like how much culture should I teach? And if that is the case, if they were aware of what culture they should be teaching, what did they teach? I'm a little bit curious about that. Did they teach only the holidays that we go like on this English lessons, that is a stereotypical kind of culture, right? Like for example, Christmas or Halloween and Thanksgiving, this and that. So what was your experience on this? Like how much culture should I teach?
Well, actually, that's something really that I learned while I was in the masters,
Mm-hmm.
because that's common questions we have as a teacher, like which culture shall we teach? Like I should teach
Mm-hmm.
American English. It's something that happens to me when I started the BA. They
Mm-hmm.
always taught me, or I always understood that American culture was the main culture that I have to be teaching, just because we were close to the border, just
Mm-hmm.
because we were like closer, and it was going to be easier for students to go to America than to go to, I don't know, Australia or New Zealand or other like common countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you get to the classroom, you see that the students are have a cell phone, they have a connection, or they have access, sorry, to other cultures through a cell phone,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe they don't pay enough attention, they don't analyze, or they don't use it to learn another country, they just are able to see it. So what if you are in a classroom and you try to use maybe TikTok to teach a subject or teach a topic, and culture is present, why don't you just also introduce that? So it
Mm-hmm.
was something really difficult to actually understand that we may need to, maybe we teachers also have it difficult, but what happens if
Yeah.
a teacher has never experienced the culture of the language? What happens if we are able to speak the language, but maybe we don't actually, we have never been in the UK, and there are so many programs in Mexico that use British English, or the books have cultural topics, but are from the UK, and just like, I don't understand what I need to teach. I don't understand what I need to do. So that happens in Asia, or happened to me at least, and some of my participants as well. When I told them like, how did you teach this? If they were trying to explain how did they teach something, but they told me like, I noticed that the students didn't know like Justin Bieber because they are in Vietnam, so maybe he wasn't that big for my students. How am I going to teach them about somebody that they don't know? So I decided to look for, I don't know, singers from in Vietnam, or singers from Korea, because they were really
Mm-hmm.
keen or really interested in Korean culture. So I
Mm-hmm.
just use Korean culture to teach them an English subject, and we talk about Vietnamese culture as well. And I introduced my own culture, so it was like a mix of
Mm-hmm.
a lot of cultures, and they just try to use the culture that they feel more like close to, or they feel familiar with, without living just using English as a medium of communication, but also using other cultures, not the language culture, but other cultures as well too, in order to teach the subject, give them like a more realistic perspective, or a real situation where the the language could be used. And sometimes, if you think about the non-native English speaker, you may think that they are also going to communicate with non-native speakers. So this interaction, that's why intercultural competence, when it comes into equation.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm speaking English, but I'm talking to maybe a Russian person, and we are both expressing our cultures, our identity, but in a language that it's not our native
Mm-hmm.
language. So that's why that's the big view of culture. And sometimes we think it's just Halloween, it's just the Day of the Dead. Ah, no, that's Mexican.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
I would always use the Day of the Dead as something to teach them about my culture. But Halloween, Thanksgiving, all those. But we forget that there are like smaller parts of culture that we don't sometimes don't pay attention to when we are in the classroom.
Mhm.
And so it is difficult for the teacher and for the student, but sometimes we need to find what is close to them in
Mhm.
order to present the language and introduce a little bit of the language culture, the target language culture.
And about your research, I'm intrigued about your findings. What were the most interesting and or unexpected findings, and what were your conclusions from your study?
Well, one is the one I already mentioned that they use like the culture the students feel more related to in order to teach.
Mm-hmm.
I was not expecting that because I did it. Like I used my culture because I felt comfortable, but
Mm-hmm.
also I noticed I was revisiting the material that I used when I was teaching there, and when I was working with like adjectives, the people that I had were the trending of the students, and many of them were like video games characters
Mm.
and we're like main American culture people. Also, like one person, the president at that time, Trump, was
Mm-hmm.
something big in China. So I
Wow.
used him for examples, and Obama as well. So I was just looking at the what icons or what people they recognize from the American culture, and that was just one activity. But also, the idea there was a term that caught me and my advisor's attention. It's the expat community.
Mm.
I didn't realize what the expat means, and actually, maybe you already know about that. But you know that expat comes from like expatriate,
Yes.
like you don't belong to your country anymore. But people that belong to that community is not that they don't belong,
Mm-hmm.
or it's not that they don't feel they don't belong to their country anymore. It's just that we are foreigners. We're gonna call ourselves expat, and we create this community of foreigners living in a quite completely country, living in another place where we may not feel familiar, but we have this community that can help us feel like at home. And another thing was that uh, they also talk about having this um, having like previous experiences or having previously lived in another country before going to China, like having the experience of
Mm-hmm.
being in a different context from their native,
Mm-hmm.
and living before living in China. So maybe I was kind of expecting it, but it caught my attention that many of them said that that helped them to cope with living in China. It's
Wow.
not that it's too difficult, but it does require some certain level of openness and willingness as well to live in a country that it's so different, that culture, traditions, customs are so different from the one that you have in this side. That's why maybe that's why they separated into Oriental and Occidental. I don't know, but it has some differences. So you really need to go there with an open mind and with just willing to learn from them.
And was there something that you might have been expecting to find in your research, but didn't really, was not mentioned by your participants, like something that you were assuming that you were going to find in your research, but didn't? Were there anything? Was there anything related to that?
I think I'm gonna sound really like stereotypical maybe or bad mean person. I don't know, but I was just expecting a lot of bad experiences. It's not that I had that many. It's just that it happens when you go to a different
Mhm.
country. But I was or like sometimes you complain a lot, or when you
Mm.
hear people coming from a different culture, or people just tourists that go to China, Japan, any part in Asia that it's different. When they come, the first thing that they tell you is like the bad experiences they had, or
Mm-hmm.
the cultural shocks that they experience.
Yeah.
And it's like I was just expecting that, but they had nothing to like good and kind and amazing words for the places they were living. Like, yes, they are different, but they are extremely interesting. They have a lot
Mm-hmm.
of culture. They have, and it was like, wow, like I expected. Sometimes you expect people like, it's not bad mouthing,
Yeah.
it's just like release all your the pressure that you may face when you speak with
Yeah.
somebody that may understand you. But in this case they were like, no, yeah, I understand this happens, but the good thing about
Mm-hmm.
that is this. So they were always in the bright side of the
Mm-hmm.
situation.
And that is also quite interesting what you're mentioning because on the one side you're expecting them to tell you what's wrong, but it also shows how open your participants are to this interculturality that you were mentioning as well, and to be positioned in a place or in a context where they are. Let's say interacting, yes, on a daily basis with multiple cultures, whether it is only Asian and Latin American or like Asian, English, and Latin American, so on and so forth. Right? So it's quite interesting to see like the pattern in your participants as well. Like everyone was so positive about it, but what does that also say about your participants, right? Like their previous experiences might have helped them to be more open in accepting of those differences, right? So, and it's not to romanticize living abroad and working abroad, right? Because there are bad things that happen if
Yes.
it's your first time going somewhere. But we're going to talk about this in a moment. So we were discussing about life in as a teacher, as an English teacher abroad, right? Like, what is it like to work abroad, and what is it like to experience things for the first time or the second time when living and working abroad? You were living in China, you mentioned. For how long did you stay working as an English teacher in China?
Well, I had stayed longer, but I only stayed for a year and a half.
Okay, so within that year and a half, what was it your first time working abroad, first of all?
Yes.
Yes. So there were a lot of things that you experienced, or all these shocks that you were talking about before. And maybe that's why you were expecting other people to also vent, right? Like take the opportunity and vent and tell me everything wrong that happened to you, right? Did you have any knowledge of Chinese language in the before you went there?
No, not at all. The only
Zero.
language I have studied before that was Japanese, and I was not even fluent or able to keep up with the conversation. So no,
I
no.
see. So a complete new language as well, and everything in China. I know a little bit because of one of my very close friends also lived and worked there as an English teacher for 2 years and a half, I think maybe around 3 years. And she mentions that everything is in Chinese. Everything, like all the even like restaurants names or shops are in a Chinese characters. And we also need to address the fact that in Chinese context, there are different types of Chinese as well, right? Like in the alphabets and all that. So, as a foreigner, maybe this happened to you. You might not be able to identify like which type of Chinese it was. Or did you pay attention to the characters when you were there?
I didn't pay attention to the characters, but I was living in the Canton area, so
Mhm.
they many people spoke Cantonese instead of Mandarin. But
Mm.
in the school, people had to because the like educational Chinese is Mandarin.
Mhm.
But outside of the school, everybody was speaking Cantonese. They at the beginning it was supposed to be like Cantonese, a dialect of the Mandarin.
Mhm.
But when they start teaching you how like the structure of Cantonese, you start noticing that it may be considered like a new another
Spanish.
language. But as you mentioned, like in Mexico, there are so many dialects, there are so many accents. Most of the characters in this case don't change the meaning. That's what helped me. And some of them, the good thing about Chinese is that characters try to relate to the figure or to what they represent. So it gets maybe more difficult to understand what they represent, but that helped me when I wanted to get to any place. Like I'm going to a mountain, so I need to look for the character that looks like a mountain. But I started learning characters, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, the language itself, it's really different from where you are. But in this case, the main language they spoke in the area, like socially, was Cantonese, and in the school was Mandarin.
Yeah. When the first time that you arrived into China, how long did it take you to start recognizing or like getting familiar with the language around you?
Well, for me, it took more than than weeks. But also, I was really like supporter, even
Mhm.
though I was the only foreigner. Like many of I was not the only English teacher in the department, so I was like introduced to the foreign community in the school. It was a big school, so many of them came from Europe. I was the only from Mexico, I'm the only one. And also in my area, I became friends with the teachers, the Chinese English teachers. So
Mhm.
they were also really helpful in like, we're gonna take you there, we're gonna take you there. They taught me how to go to the supermarket, and they taught me that the first question in the supermarket was about the bag, if I wanted a bag, and the second one was about how much was it. So I think like I did learn a little bit for like in
Mhm.
the first 3 weeks, four,
Mhm.
and at least I learned the places that I knew or that I was going to frequent.
Mhm.
uh, I knew how the characters were supposed to be written and how you should like say the words,
Mhm.
but it was still really really difficult. If I like after a year and a half, I really think like I cannot keep up with the conversation. But I don't know how I did it or what was happening in my mind. I was not able to communicate that much because I didn't have knowledge of a lot of vocabulary or the tones. But when people were speaking, I kind of have the idea of what they were talking about. Like I understand some words and I could relate and understand what they were saying, not
Mhm.
completely, but at least have an idea, a grasp of what
Right.
the conversation was about. So I was like, maybe I did learn something, but I didn't realize.
Tell me, how do you end up working in China? Like, where do you look for job opportunities? Do you use any specific websites? What was your process to get there?
I'm gonna kind of disappoint in that area because that was an opportunity presented to me. I had a friend telling me that she had a friend in
Mhm.
China and she was like looking for teachers. Like her company was looking for people who wanted to go to China and teach English. And I was like, I have never actually, it was 6 months after I finished the BA. So I had never taught in another school. I was just coming back from the Unison to going back, sorry, to Guanajuato.
Mhm.
And then I was like, well, I studied at the BA. I should be teaching, but it was difficult to find a job at that point here. And I just wanted to have the experience. I was like, I've always been interested in the Asian culture. Why not China? Like I've never thought of it, but this opportunity here is I should just do it. And it happened. Like they, it happened in 3 months. They told me like about the job on almost like December. I did the interview in January, and I had to be there in February, March. So
Mhm.
all happened like this. Actually, I didn't realize I was in China until I was there,
Mhm.
and I was in a sub in a yeah in a no, it was not a subway, it was a train. I was going to the place where I was going to teach, and I was like,
Mhm.
what am I doing here? Why did I come here? Why did I choose China? But yeah, in this case, it was because somebody told me about it.
Yeah.
But there's so many websites, there's so many um, companies that have like an open space. There are schools that you can find a job in their website, so you can do like research. And one of my best hobbies is looking for a job, even if I don't need one. So I love looking for jobs. And I have noticed that there's so many companies. Sometimes they ask you for money in order to get you there.
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend you not to. And if you have like a company or you have a school already, I 100% recommend you to check it on the embassy website, just because there's still a lot of scams.
Mm-hmm.
And if you give us money, you can come here. We're gonna give you a letter, and when you go to the embassy, they may tell you like, this is not a real place. This is not nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But the embassy has the opportunity. Oh, I think all embassies have the same, like where you can check if the company that is hiring you
Mm-hmm.
has is registered in the government. It's allowed to have foreigners, because that's another thing in China. The company must be registered, and the company must be able to hire foreigners. In some places, some countries in Asia, it's like if we have locals that can fulfill that position, we're not gonna let you hire foreigners.
Mm-hmm.
So you should be really careful with that. And I always recommend that. But yeah, there's so many companies, there are others, there's schools. Even if you click in the most common job websites like in LinkedIn, um Computrabajo, all those, you may find jobs for English teachers in China.
Right. So, if China is your destination as well, and you would like to look not only in China but also in different parts of the world, you can also find accounts on TikTok, for example. Now that this technology is advancing and in apps and social media, it's also growing. You can find plenty of either Instagram accounts or TikTok accounts with some keywords. If you go to the browser, like to look for this kind of material. Content, yes, related to how to find a job in China or what to do, what not to do. You can always find them there. And there are also some Facebook groups that you could visit according to the country that you would like to go to. As far as I've heard, in China, at least they ask you to do a demo lesson. Some companies or most companies, they ask you to do a demo lesson. Of course, you're not there, so you might have to do it online. So you also have to keep that in mind. In the Chinese context, do they? You mentioned about a letter, so I'm assuming that is this invitation form issued by the government as well, right?
Yes, well, in this case, it was not issued by the government, was more the company.
Okay.
But of course, when you request the visa, it's going to be um, you give the letter, and they have to be sure. If the letter is not like valid, they won't give
Mhm.
you the visa. But it's not actually a working visa that you're applying for.
Mhm.
Sometimes since they're short periods, they may use another type of visa.
Mhm.
There's some, like, I don't remember exactly what type of visas they gave me, but for the working visa is a longer process, and at least in China, it takes more time to get a working visa. But first, the company allows you or helps you to get another type while you are working on your working visa.
Right. So all of this kind of like admin things or documentation kind of topics, we might address this on our on Instagram, on the LinguaBees Instagram. Maybe if you have some questions, you can ask those directly through our stories, and we can give some more details, right? Because we're talking about a process that is too specific in this two different contexts that we might not have enough time to share all the bits and details right over here. But as far as it goes to your teaching experience in China, can you share maybe one example of a good experience and one example of a bad experience, or not a bad experience but a culture shock maybe, or something that you felt like it was going to happen in one way but it happened in a different way from your expectations? Could you tell us one experience of each?
Well, I will start with the bad, just because I will start with that. Um, I felt like I was not, since I was only the foreign teacher teaching culture, and it was not like a curriculum, but subject. they didn't pay that much attention to my class, so I felt kind of like left behind.
Mhm.
Sometimes I arrived to class and they didn't tell me that they canceled my class,
Mm.
or sometimes they had to do something else, and when I arrived, they never like consider me in order to take decisions about my class. They just take it, and my class was only once a week, so I kind of felt like a guest instead of the teacher, or the
Mhm.
teacher of this subject. And sometimes the students, the ones that were not good or didn't like English, they didn't pay attention to my class, and I was like, why am I here?
Mhm.
What am I doing? But in the bad and the good experience is that I noticed that they were more interested also in the Mexican or Spanish culture. Like in this case, when I said Spanish, I will focus mostly in Mexican culture. I talked a little bit about Latin American culture, but they were also interested to learn. I sometimes taught them also a
Mhm.
little bit of Spanish,
Yeah.
and they were really like, "Wow, that's something new. What we didn't know about that." And having just the opportunity or being able or feeling that you are capable of helping people that do not share language, culture, or also finding the similarities between your culture and their culture. When I talked about the Day of the Dead, I used it in order. It was a Chinminjie, which is kind of a Day of the Dead for them. Not, of course, not the same thing, but they also do a few things similar to the Spanish version. So I was like, wow, that's nice having of feeling like some cultural aspects are a little bit, just a little bit related to your culture. That
Mhm.
makes you feel more like welcome, more like warm, like
Right.
you can interact, you can belong here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, as talking about the part that you felt left behind during the decision making of your lessons, or like they notifying you of cancellations and so on and so forth. This thing also happened to me, and I am assuming that it is because the company is bringing you and they are investing money into you
Mhm.
being and working with them, that they might not feel like this is something big of a deal, right? Of course, out of courtesy, this is international everywhere, they should give you a heads up, right? But in this case, you also, as an international teacher, you need to understand that this might not happen all of the time, right? And these are the little things that make you as a stronger person as well. In my case, some decisions were being made in as to like which lessons I would teach. So my schedule was being organized and also managed by the company, right? So my schedule might be a little bit tighter than other teachers. And my in my own opinion was like, why does my schedule feel more tiring than other teachers' schedules, right? But it's because of this. Like they want to take advantage of you being there, or at least in my context, right? So they wanted to take advantage of me working with them. They were very excited about the lessons and about the response from the clients from this school, for example. Like they were very interested in having a foreign teacher. So this translates in different ways. For one, for me personally, but for the company, it was a very good deal, right? Like having a foreign teacher boosts their popularity in their local area, right? In the local context as well. So you also have to think about that your schedule might be a little bit tighter than others, but if you really want to go and work abroad, you also need to consider that that's what you're going to do. You're going there to work, to also have the experience. But the first thing that you're going to do there is that you are going to go to teach English. And talking about this, Karin, in your opinion, what would be the basic qualifications someone should have if they wanted or they wish to teach English in other countries?
Well, besides like being trained, because I think that we really need to be trained in order to teach another language. It's not like I know the language, I'm just gonna teach. Sometimes we may do it worse, or sometimes we may not help. So that's why at least we need to have knowledge in how to teach a foreign language. So that will be like the main one. Also, having knowledge of the language, being proficient in the language, because sometimes we feel like if I'm able to keep up with a conversation in like buying something, I can teach it. And it's like, no, you need to be
Mm-hmm.
more than that. You need to be more proficient, and mainly knowing, understanding that you're going to another culture and you may have to adapt. You need to adapt. It's not okay, there's some things that you may not give up, and it's not giving up, it's just putting your culture, putting yourself a little bit behind in order to understand, and then just putting your limits. But I also think that if you decide to go to a different culture to teach the language, be careful and be aware that there are going to be differences. And sometimes you are in their space and you need to learn and understand their space. And
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, if people go there, won't go the same way as me, like not knowing anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
I was, maybe it's my personality that helped me cope with everything that happened. But there's people that I know that go there and it's like 2 weeks after that, it's like, no, I'm going back. I can't. I just can't. But you knew that this was going to happen. No, I can't. I can. I didn't know anything about China. I can't. It's like, okay, I
Right.
understand. I think knowing also who are you going to teach, or having an idea of their culture, their customs, their traditions may help the teacher a lot as well.
Right. Just be adventurous for once, right? Like if you really want to do it, just do it and don't think about it too much. Like what could go wrong? Don't think about it because there are things that are out of your control. So of course you're going to be in a different country and also you have to be open-minded as to that. Like you're going to experience so many new things and well, there are good things that are going to happen, but there are also there are bad things that are going to happen, but there are also very good things that are going to happen. And also, just having the experience will make you grow as a professional, not only professionally, but also personally. I think that you
Yes.
grow a lot as a person while being abroad. Karin, do you have any advice for those who might join the MA in Applied Linguistics in English language teaching, or to maybe to those who dream about experience in teaching internationally?
Well, I think that one of the things I always said to future students in the MA is just take advantage of your teachers. I have always like I keep thinking that those are some of the most experienced, learned, and professional, knowledgeable people I have ever known, and they know a lot and they can help you a lot. And
Mhm,
sometimes the MA may get a little bit difficult and may challenge you not only academically but also mentally and personally,
mhm,
but it's worth the experience if that's what you want, right? Because sometimes I have heard people saying like doing um, a graduate studies, it may not be for everybody, and it doesn't. I
mhm.
don't even know how I finished, but it was amazing. I feel really like proud of myself of finishing and doing something that I like. That's something that I also enjoy, that they gave me the opportunity of working in a project that I wanted to work with in. So, and also choosing my topic, even if it took me time, they helped me and they allowed me to do it. So I always and I will always recommend the masters and the teachers, and also the experience of learning a masters. But I am aware that it's not maybe for everybody. And also for people who want to go outside, but I think we need to do it at some point. Even if it is just for 1 month, 2 months, if it is just um, workshop or a training that your work is like asking you to go mandatory, do it. Just because you have you may have other experiences, you will see your job, you will see yourself from another perspective, and also seeing that there's more than what you are used to makes you feel like you belong to this community, but you are also part of a whole deal, a whole
Exactly.
idea. So
Yeah.
I highly recommend you that. Also, I think teaching it's amazing. I love teaching and teaching culture mainly, experiencing other cultures, and not knowing only about the big area of culture, the international culture, but also learning about the everyday culture, asking
Mhm.
for something, how people say good morning, everybody, even though you don't know each other, how people just introduce other people, how many cultural aspects that we don't notice are also part of the culture of a country.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Karin, for such an insightful conversation, for sharing your research and experiences working as an English teacher abroad as well. I sincerely hope people feel inspired with your story and dare to dream big like you did. And I don't know if you have something else to say.
No, no, I think I have said it all. Thank you.
All right. Well, we're glad that you accepted our invitation and that you worked today with us. And thank you also to the audience for joining us on another episode of the Lingua Beast podcast. Your support is much appreciated. We have a great response from the last episode, and we hope that you continue to support this small project, but with very big dreams, just as as Karin's dreams. Yeah. So for more information on where to find us, we've left our social media details in the description box. Don't forget to like and subscribe to all our platforms. And this has been the Lingua Beast podcast. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you, Karin.
Thank you. Bye.